Good afternoon. It is time to call this meeting to order, and we are the Salina City Planning Commission. So we'll call the meeting to order, and we will begin with minutes.
Well, if our call to order and roll call, the only members we appear to be absent are Mr. Linkowitz, and Mr. Lang said that he could not be here. We are adding to the roll Kate Brule, who is our new youth representative. And you are a student at Central High?
Sacred Heart.
Sacred Heart? Okay, so we have Sacred Heart and Central High represented now as youth members.
Welcome.
And this is Kate's first meeting, so we want to welcome her.
Excellent.
And we did have a previous meeting on the 19th of February, and those minutes are before you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Do I have a motion to approve minutes?
Oh, yes. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Motion carries. Bringing us to new business for this evening. Our first item is a public hearing item, application Z19-1, filed by Joe Hill, on behalf of the Joe Hill Trust, requesting a change in zoning classification from I2 light industrial to R2 multifamily residential. This is to allow construction of 2 residential dwellings at the corner of Reynolds Street and Lincoln Avenue, properly known as 935 and 941 Reynolds Street. Or with that,
Check with you, Mr. Chair. to
was this
see
last
where-
year?
That is
Last
last.
week? Sorry,
last-
that was last week,
That was last.
or last
week.
time. I
So,
missed that meeting.
Didn't sound familiar.
No, didn't sound familiar at all. Let's try application Z19-2,
yes.
filed by Gary Gleason, Gleason and Sons. This is on behalf of MacArthur Enterprises, requesting a change in zoning classification from A1 agriculture to PC5 planned service commercial. This is to allow installation of an electronic changeable copy sign, and we are at the 3400 block of South 9th Street.
Mr. Hers is going to have the staff report on this, but before he does, for the benefit of Kate and Spencer and also for newer members to the board, we spent a great deal of 2018 discussing whether electronic changeable signs, or what we would refer to as digital billboards, should be allowed within the city limits of Salina. The Planning Commission ultimately recommended that digital billboards be prohibited within the city limits. The City Commission concurred with that recommendation, and then some city commissioners wanted that reconsidered as the case of billboards along interstate highways. So where we ended up was that the only place within the city limits of the city of Salina where a digital billboard is permitted is a location that's within 200 feet of an interstate highway. And so that is the one exception to the general prohibition on electronic changeable copy advertising signs. So based on that one exception, within 200 feet of an interstate highway, we have an application to present to you today that involves just that, a request for such a sign within 200 feet of an interstate highway. So I will turn it over to Mr. Hers.
Clarification, though, on-site signs are allowed, though.
On-site signs are allowed. This is by digital billboard, we're meaning signs that advertise a product or business or activity that is not located on the property.
But this is located on the property.
But this, the intent of this, there is no, if you can see on the map, this is a vacant property. So there's no business, activity, or product that's on this property that's being advertised. The purpose of this sign is to advertise things that aren't taking place or offered for sale on this property. And that,
Oh, okay.
that makes it an off-premise advertising sign.
Okay, so the background of this area, this is the area of town that we refer to as the South Ninth Overlay Corridor. And it was basically commissioned in February of 1997 when the City Commission and County Commission got together and they decided to hire a consultant to help plan and study for the future of this corridor as it affects both city property and county property. And in October of 1997, a final plan was presented to the commissions, and the central recommendation was to allow a mixed-use development pattern on the west side of South 9th Street between 9th Street and I-135. This would include service commercial uses such as auto dealerships, business offices, research and development facilities, and limited retail uses with which generate light traffic such as motels and furniture stores. That study was the genesis for the creation and adoption of the South 9th Street Corridor Overlay District, which we have today, that was adopted in October of 1999. And that overlay district limits the permitted uses in the green hashed area on the map here to 6 permitted uses and 15 potential conditional uses, and also has limitations on outdoor storage and has special requirements for landscaping, signage, and architectural appearance of buildings. So because the property that is the subject of our review is located in that South 9th Overlay District, it is required to have either a planned development district zoning designation or a planned commercial zoning designation. And so in this case, the properties to the north and the properties to the south both have planned commercial C5 zoning, and so that's what the applicant is proposing. And the nature of the request, as Mr. Andrews stated, is that Gleason & Sons Signs is working with a client who is working to erect a digital billboard that is 14 feet by 48 feet in size in the northwest corner of the vacant property, north of the Long MacArthur dealership and south of the Hilton Garden Inn Hotel. Because this property is currently zoned A1, they need to rezone it to the commercial designation, and because the property is located in the South Ohio Overlay District, as I mentioned, it has to be a planned commercial district. So PC5 is what we're looking at here today. Something of note and importance, typically when we rezone a property from agricultural to a commercial designation, it is required by section 42-8 of the zoning ordinance that we also plat the property or subdivide the property in accordance to the subdivision regulations. In this particular case, the applicant is proposing to defer the platting of the property until it is ready to be developed. Because all they're proposing at this point in time is a sign with no other development or improvements on the site, no buildings, no driveways, no parking, they're requesting that you defer that activity until they are ready to develop the site and pull permits for buildings. The zoning requirements for PC5 zoning classification in the overlay district, the regulations would be limited to both the requirements of the overlay district as well as the C5 district. The uses that we have would be limited to automobile sales and services, furniture showrooms as permitted uses, and warehouses, hotels, business offices, and restaurants as potential conditional uses. The applicant is not proposing to develop at this time, and so none of those uses really apply. The only use that we're really looking at is the off-premise advertising digital billboard. Setbacks, when we do get to the point of developing the property, will be limited to 75 feet from the center line of South 9th or 25 feet from the property line, whichever is greater. No side yards or rear yards will be required except for the condition that all points would have to be accessible by a fire truck, and if there is access required in order to get to those points, the fire truck would need at least 25 or 20 feet of access in width there. A minimum lot area must be an acre, which we are about 17 and a half in this case, so we are in excess of an acre. And the maximum lot coverage is 50%. Maximum structure height is 50 feet, although the maximum height for signs in the overlay district is 30 feet. And that's what the applicant is proposing, is a 30-foot sign in the corner there. Signs have to be within 100 feet of the interstate highway in this corridor. The applicant is proposing the sign to be 30 feet from the west property line and 30 feet from the north property line. So parking is required to be paved. Landscaping requirements are required to meet the standard regulations and that affect commercial properties. And outdoor storage is limited to the side and rear yards when the outdoor storage is screened so that it's not visibly visual. Exterior lighting is to be downcast, so you're not affecting the adjacent properties or streets right away. And one thing that is unique about this property being in the South 9th Overlay District is that it does have architectural standards. It does require that all entrances of the building face 9th Street and that all exterior finishes be attractive with no precast concrete or metal panels, and that an overall design must present a compatible appearance. And so when we do get to the point of having a final development plan, when this site is developed, there will be elevation drawings of the proposed properties, and the process of that review is going to be similar to the Hilton Garden Inn for those of you that were part of that process, where we will have a final development site plan showing you the site and how the building and improvements would relate to the property lines, as well as elevation drawings showing you what the building would look like and the type of materials that would be used for any proposed buildings. Any conditional uses or any deviations of the regulations must be specifically requested by the applicant at the initial hearing or at a separate public hearing at the time of the request. And to our knowledge, the applicant is not requesting any deviations or conditional uses. Looking at the suitability of the site for development under the existing zoning, the property does have a unique shape and orientation where it's kind of a triangle or pie shaped, where you have over 1,600 feet, lineal feet adjacent to I-135 and then about 245 feet adjacent to South 9th Street. And the applicant views this property as prime commercial property, as it is adjacent to two major corridors and is surrounded to the north and south by other PC5 property. And on the east side, where we go to the county, they have industrial zoning on that side of the street of 9th Street. 9th Street is a 4-lane road in this location with no turn lanes. And so the traffic impacts and management, it is not suitable for large-scale big box development, but could be suitable for other types of retail, such as automobile dealerships, hotels, other small, lesser high impact as far as traffic is concerned uses. And the tract is suitable for that type of commercial activity, where the I-1 or A1 zoning district would inhibit that type of development. Staff would note that because of the historical use of the off-ramps, if you look at older photos, aerial photos, you'll see that this area before the interchange at Waterwell and Schilling were developed, there were off-ramps that went down and connected to South 9th Street, which I think Mr. Andrew has. So this land was actually part of KDOT right-of-way before it was deeded over to the Long MacArthur Enterprises, who is the current owner. And so it does have a low elevation, which was because of the historic use of those off-ramps coming down from an elevated ramp down to 9th Street, as well as having drainage capacity and retention. So it is a lower site, kind of a bowl-shaped, where there will be significant fill that will be needed or moving around of the grade of the ground in order to develop it when we get to that point. Character of the neighborhood: the property is surrounded by PC5 zoning to the north and south, and heavy industrial in the county to the east, and therefore staff believes C5 zoning would be compatible with the neighboring properties. Looking at utilities and services, Long MacArthur and Marshall Motors are already developed to the south here, and then you also have the Hilton Garden Inn. So we do have utilities extended into this area. We have adequate water, sanitary, sewer, and gas, electrical lines, and the like in place. And so there is no need for additional services in order to service the changeable copy sign that's being proposed. Street access points, traffic control, utility extensions, and drainage will have to be addressed in detail when we do get to the point of platting the property prior to development. So that is something that will be deferred to that platting stage if you see that as appropriate. Looking at conformance to the comprehensive plan, the future land use map of the comprehensive plan does show this area as a future commercial designation, which would be consistent with the proposed zoning. There's two criteria that we look at when we do have a future land use that is consistent with the proposed zoning, and that is the locational criteria as well as the development criteria. And the locational criteria in this case are that the property be located adjacent to arterial streets or thoroughfares, which we certainly have in this case, being adjacent to the Interstate 135 and South 9th Street. And that commercial development should have required site design features as not to adversely impact adjacent uses, which the PC5 zoning classification would have, as there will be a final site development plan along with elevation drawings that will be presented to you prior to development. And that commercial generated traffic should not feed directly onto local residential streets. In this case, all traffic would be directed in and out of 9th Street, and that commercial uses should be located on key corridors, specifically South 9th Street, which is what we're dealing with in this case. When we look at the development criteria, we don't have a final development plan yet. That'll be something that the applicant is requesting to defer and would have to be presented to you at a later time when the property is looking to be developed. The only thing we have at this moment is the proposed location of the digital billboard, which again is going to be 30 feet from the north property line and 30 feet from the west property line in the northwest corner of the property. The Planning Commission has a few alternatives in this case. You could approve the requested zoning change from A1 to PC5, deferring the platting of the property until the property is ready to be developed, subject to any conditions you might see appropriate. You could approve the requested zoning change from A1 to C5, subject to satisfactory platting of the property and subject to any conditions that you see appropriate. In that scenario, you would be suggesting that you would approve the rezoning request, but you'd like for the property to be platted at the same time, which would direct the applicant to go and meet with surveyors and engineering teams to create a subdivision plat for you to review in conjunction with the rezoning application. And number 3, you could postpone the request if there is a need for additional information to make a decision, and you could deny the applicant's application, citing the reasons thereof, if you don't feel it's an appropriate rezoning at this time. If you do wish to recommend the approval of the applicant's request for PC5 zoning of the entire 17.43 acre tract with deferring the platting until the time it's developed, we do have a number of conditions that we would suggest. Number one is that the entire property be platted prior to development of the site, with the exception of the proposed digital billboard. And that use of the site shall be limited to those permitted uses listed in the CO district regulations, plus any other requested by the applicant and approved by the planning commission. And it shall be subject to the bulk and use limitations of the CO and C5 district. The CO is the designation of the South 9th Street Overlay District, for clarification. And then number 3, that the signage be limited to a single 14-foot by 48-foot digital billboard, and that number 4, a separate sign permit be required to be applied for and issued. And then number 5, that a final development plan shall be submitted and approved by you prior to any development of the property. Staff would also note that because the property is zoned by Long MacArthur Enterprises and is an off-premise sign that will be owned and operated by a second party, that prior to a sign permit being issued, we will need to have a sign easement drafted along with exhibits and then recorded in the Register of Deeds, or some type of lease agreement with Long MacArthur stating the allowable use of that sign on this property, since the owners of the sign and operators of the sign aren't party to the ownership of the property. So that's something to be noted as well. It doesn't really take any necessary action on your part, but it's more of a note for the applicant if you were to approve this rezoning request and they apply for a sign permit. So with that, we'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
We do have an elevation drawing we probably want to show you of the proposed sign. This could be helpful. So this is the proposed rendering. The sign would be 14 feet in height, 48 feet in width, and the total height would be 30 feet. I'm guessing that it's probably represented a little taller than 30 feet in the visual here, in the graphic, but it would be limited to 30 feet unless you make an exception to that requirement. And that 30-foot requirement is a requirement that we have in the South 9th Overlay District, so that's where that comes from.
Thank you. Are there questions for staff?
It looks like the Hilton Inn is pretty far away. Drawings don't really reflect that.
Yeah, I think that's probably what Mr. Andrews said, is that's probably the Courtyard by Marriott, because if we go to the aerial photo again, John. There, that one's better. We didn't really, it doesn't really show this up here, but if you're looking to the north, what you're seeing adjacent to the sign is going to be vacant property that hasn't been developed yet, and the Hilton Garden Inn is going to be farther to the east, so you won't see it in that photograph. So what you're seeing, do we have the GIS available, John, or do we not? Okay. So what you're seeing is development that's a little further to the north in the background.
I just want to confirm that it meets the Kansas Department of Transportation requirements next to the interstate.
The way the process works is, to answer your question, we believe it well. That's something they review and approve, not something we would review and approve. But the way the process works is we would, assuming this zoning request gets approved and it allows us to approve the proposed sign, then that sign would have to, that application then would have to go on to the state. And they have a division there that reviews and approves it, but it does meet the requirements that they have, which are, it's got to be 1,000 feet from any other sign, any other digital billboard, and we don't see that there's any other sign like this within 1,000 feet, and that's really one of the biggest things. And so I don't see that there's any issue with that, but that's something they'll review on their side.
Thank you.
We might want to add for your benefit that after going through the reviews and discussions that we did, and where the city commission ended up allowing for such signs within 200 feet of an interstate highway, we have issued one permit since that time, and it's up at West Crawford and I-135 on the site of the Quality Inn. It's on the west side of the interstate. I don't know if the sign has gone up yet, but we issued the permit, approved it. It then went up to KDOT. KDOT reviewed it. They would not, what they do is they submit their forms to the local jurisdiction, and then they won't approve it without a signature from someone here in Salina saying that it meets all of our criteria. So there's a two-tiered review. There's local review, then KDOT review, and then they won't actually approve it from their perspective till someone in the local jurisdiction signs off on their permit.
So the applicant, once they have our approval, as part of their application form that goes to the state, they will come to us, and there's a part of the application where we actually sign and state what the zoning is and that it's approved. And then it goes to the state level.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not, this is a public hearing, but we'd like to hear from the applicant. Do you have anything to say, or?
No, I'm Gary Gleason from Gleason and Son Signs, 921 South 3rd.
Thank
I
you.
think they've pretty well told everything that we're doing. I have contacted the state. The state has approved that site. And, of course, we have to go through the city, to get back and forth. You know how sometimes you work with the state and the city and everything to get everything worked out right. But everything's been approved. We've been on this for quite a while. And the main reason for this sign is to try to develop the downtown area. And that's going to be the biggest advertising on this sign will be mostly everything downtown. Blue Beacon Incorporated will own the sign. They're paying for the sign to put it up. They will be generating all the advertising on it. So it'll have nothing to do with our sign shop as far as selling advertisement. It'll be just mostly them trying to develop downtown Salina.
Questions for Mr. Gleason? Thank you, sir.
Do it.
Thanks for being here.
So the only thing we're doing is changing the zoning. We're not approving the sign.
You are,
You are, yeah, because it's part of a planned district.
because it's part of a planned district, the proposed site development plan for this site is this sign and nothing else at this time. We don't know what the time frame is that Long MacArthur may have, but at some point in time, they're going to be interested in seeing this property develop. And at that time, the zoning will already be in place, but any plan for any construction or development on this property would come back to this body for review. But what you're doing today is saying, one, you think this is suitable for the same zoning that is Hilton Garden Inn and the car dealerships have, and then secondly, you are being asked to approve this sign, because if you act on this today, we're not going to approve any sign that isn't exactly this. So the purpose of that is that you are seeing this, you're understanding that it's 14 by 48 and it's 30 feet tall, so they're not going to be allowed to put up a 30 by 70 foot sign that's 50 feet tall because you zoned the property. They can only put up this sign because you're being asked to approve this as, because it's a planned district, this is the plan.
And it'll be in this location as well. So you're approving that sign at that spot.
With those dimensions and height.
But we're changing the zoning on the entire parcel of land.
Yes. With the note on there that they can't develop or build anything on it until they plat it and until they submit their plans for any buildings. So, for your benefit, the plans for Long MacArthur Ford dealership were reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. The plans for Marshall Motors was reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. The plans for Hilton Garden Inn were reviewed and approved by this commission. And if there's any plan to further develop this property, that will come back to you for review and approval. The only thing you're approving today is a sign. And we don't think they need to plat the property in order to have a sign, but they are going to need to plat it if they want to put in buildings or roads or things like that. So.
I don't see anyone from the public, unless I can't see behind the podium. So I'm going to close the public hearing and we'll bring this up here for discussion again. Are there other questions for staff?
Are we ready for a motion?
We are.
I move that we approve the requested zoning change from A1 to PC5, deferring plating of the property until the property is ready to be developed and is subject to any other conditions the commission deems appropriate.
Which would be the 5 listed?
Yes. Is it 5?
There are 5 there.
Yes.
Unless we want to deem others appropriate, I guess. But that's what your intention was,
Right.
for the 5 listed. Are there questions about that? No?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve application Z19-2, deferring plating to a later time and subject to the 5 conditions set out by staff on page 8.
And condition number 3 limits this to a single 14-foot by 48-foot sign that's 30 feet tall.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gleason. Which brings us to administrative items
We have none.
and preliminary discussion items.
We have one of those for you today. And we just gave you a little bit of background. It's something that it seems to be a common, some cities regulate this through their zoning code, some regulate it through other codes, but almost every community in Kansas prohibits the parking of vehicles in unimproved front yard area in residential areas. So, in other words, there is a requirement that if you're parking in the front yard area, you need to be parked either on a driveway or adjacent surfaced parking area. So we have some locations in town where people have a paved driveway and they might put in a gravel or asphalt milling swing next to their driveway and park their boat and trailer or park their camper or park their RV or park an extra vehicle. That is permissible. What is not permissible is parking just in the grass, not on a driveway. And so the current code says that no motor vehicle or recreational vehicle shall be parked in any front yard. And our city code enforcement officers have indicated to staff that it would be helpful for them if we worked with you as a body to set out more specifically what types of vehicles and trailers cannot be parked on grass and dirt. And so we're not sure that just using the current language of vehicles and recreation vehicles, it may not be broad enough to encompass all types of vehicles and trailers that was intended. And so we have another section of city code. I don't know, as you look at your neighborhoods, whether people are aware of this, but it is not legal to park a truck, a tractor, a trailer, a mobile home, a motor home, a boat, or a bus on the street overnight in a residential area. And so you can in a commercial area, but you can see that that list is much more specific. So Some of the things we'd like to discuss with you is just how broadly this goes, if we need to list trailers separately, boats separately. I guess it's conceivable that somebody might park a boat not on a trailer, and so we just want to address every eventuality. So what we're requesting is that you, as a commission, authorize us to initiate a text amendment so we can look at this and get some feedback from you on specifically what vehicles as specifically as possible. Does it include motorcycles? Does it include lawn tractors? Does it include and things of that nature, trailers by themselves? So we would just like to have the opportunity to bring this back in front of you to discuss whether we should broaden the terms vehicles and recreational vehicles to cast a broader net and give better guidance to our code enforcement officers. It's not so much this time of year where there's snow on the ground and you can't always tell what's there, but as spring and summer come, they indicate to us that one of their biggest code enforcement activities is in complaints about people who are parking in the grass and dirt in the front yards and leaving ruts or driving mud in the streets or cracking up sidewalks or things like that. So our request would be for you to authorize staff to initiate an amendment just to further clarify what types of vehicles and trailers must be parked on an all-weather surface. We put the city's brochure that we have in your packet. We have that up on the screen. It's got some okay pictures. They're not the greatest. They're ones that we have picked out to try to illustrate the issue, but we'd be open to any questions that you have. We don't know if commissioners are aware that that is a prohibition. The one thing that we do have is there is an item that if you have an event, if there's a special event inside the city limits, whether it was at the soccer complex or something at Tony's Pizza Event Center or one of the parks, that it is permissible to temporarily park on the grass if there's some bona fide special event. But as a rule, your neighbor shouldn't be parking in their front yard or in the grass and dirt if they're not on a driveway. So we'd be open to any questions that you have, but our request of you this afternoon would be to make a motion to authorize us to initiate a text amendment so we could bring that back and discuss it further with you and maybe give you more examples.
So,
Parking.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Parking is not, might be feasible for somebody to park their moving van on the grass to unload it. That's not parking.
No, that's considered temporary. And that, that may be something that we have, some of the things we've seen, and that scenario was placed to us. There was an example from another community in Kansas where somebody had a boat on a trailer and they put 2 concrete blocks in the ground and they put one tire over one block and one tire the other one, and they said, my boat is parked on paving. It's just that everything else was grass. So there are some things that we may have to do to address that and to make sure that it's clear that if you're moving in or out of a house and you take a moving truck and you drive it through the yard to the front porch to load and unload, that is not considered parking. That would be loading and unloading. And that would be the same thing that about 20 years ago, the Planning Commission recommended disallowing parking large RVs in driveways in residential areas, and that was one of the things that came up I'm getting ready to go on a trip. Can I pull my RV in the driveway and load it? Yes, that would not be considered parking. That prohibition ultimately never went to the city commission, but the planning commission decided that you shouldn't be able to park things like dump trucks or school buses or large RVs in a residential driveway. But this doesn't address what you can park, it just addresses what type of surface you have to park on, so you're not tearing up the grass or dragging mud into the streets. Or the other thing that people don't realize is that sidewalks, the only part of a sidewalk in our residential areas that's reinforced to support vehicles is the part that's in your driveway approach. So if you are constantly driving over a sidewalk with a vehicle, eventually it's going to crumble because it's not designed to support that weight. And so this is also a measure that's designed to keep people using driveways. So we just attached for you an article from the Topeka Capital Journal because it just so happens that they're discussing the same topic in Topeka, so.
But the request to initiate a text amendment is not in regards to section 3841.
Right.
It's just another
It's just in regard to
example
the
of-
zoning code. And so we just gave you 3841 as an example of another city code that seems to be, the list seems to be more specific than just vehicle or recreation vehicle. And so that was just, it's not a perfect model, but what we're saying is that our code enforcement people would prefer it if our ordinance, specified 7, tractor, yes or no, motorcycle, yes or no, boat on a trailer, yes or no. So we want to go through kind of each of those items with the commission, and so that our list is as clear as possible.
And so you work together with code enforcement officers
Yes.
and complaints they've had in the past and
Right.
and resolve them through a text amendment. Because 3841, well, obviously the one we're talking about is extremely vague, but so is 3841 in a sense. A lot of the complaints that I hear from people are on that
Yes.
bit
And-
right there regarding what type of truck should be parked on their street and what type of trailer, but that's not very clear in that statement either.
In that, that particular ordinance dates probably from the 1940s or 50s, so it could stand to be updated as well, and it would make sense for us to make the two consistent, but it's just that we are only talking about Chapter 42 because that's the one that's under the Planning Commission's purview is the zoning code. So we will certainly look at that other ones to try to make them, the language as consistent as possible.
That, I think, would be a very good idea. Because trailers have grown. Hobby trailers, that's something that really needs to be addressed. There seems to be a proliferation of people with those gigantic hobby trailers that you can park a car inside. That's not a trailer anymore. That's a moving van. And the same way with trailers with nothing on them. Empty trailers. They've gotten bigger and bigger, and now the length of my house, on the street. So, yeah, I think we definitely need to address them.
So on page 2 there, we just have, our request is that the Planning Commission by motion authorize staff to initiate a text amendment to further clarify what types of vehicles and trailers must be parked on an all-weather surface. The other thing I would qualify, and I think it's addressed elsewhere, but we took note that in the City of Lawrence and the City of Manhattan, they prohibit parking in the front yard on grass, except for the days of the week where there are home football games, and then it is legal to sell parking space on the grass in your front yard for football games, so.
I live in the wrong neighborhood. I could make some money. You have to live on Country Club Road to do that.
You ready?
Is everyone in agreement that we should consider initiation of a text amendment? Do we need a motion then?
We would prefer a motion and
I
a
would
second, so
entertain a
Crystal
motion
gets
then.
that.
I move that we authorize staff to initiate a text amendment to section 42-552D to further clarify what types of vehicles and trailers must be parked on an all-weather surface if parked in a front yard area.
It's been moved and seconded that we initiate a text amendment for vehicles and trailers parked on all-weather surfaces in front yards. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
We have one item under unfinished business. Mr. Chair was not here at the last meeting where we brought back some additional information about what has occurred over there at Western Extra Light and border states.
I reviewed it on the video.
And we had a nice photograph of the area from the north, and we had several commissioners ask us to take a photograph from Broadway. We decide that, the sun conditions and everything were fine. Obviously, the snow doesn't help. What this photo does indicate is that the fenced-in storage area is an awful long ways from Broadway. So it's really, I don't know if you can zoom that at all, John, because from here I can't even see it at all. But that is the fenced-in area. Obviously, some of the items in there are covered with snow, but as we interpreted the action that the Planning Commission took, we believe that, at least from how staff interpreted, that they had done what they were asked to do. They put up a powder-coated fence. It's 8 feet tall. It has does have some barbed wire at the top. The outdoor storage does not exceed 12 feet in height, and they did plant junipers to screen the north side of it and wrapped it around slightly, but it was never, we don't believe it was ever presented either in 2008 or this time around that the outdoor storage was going to be fully screened. And so the point of emphasis for landscape buffering was on the north, and at the time this was considered, Kmart was still an active business, and now Kmart is closed, but they did put in the plantings, and they actually put in 2 more than what was required on their plan. So I will grant you this is not the best of photographs, and maybe we have to wait further for better spring conditions, but we basically stood on the curb line at Broadway and took a photograph of what you see to the west, and this is how it came out. So we do believe that it's really not much in the line of sight, and I can blame Ms. Good, but her observation at the hearing was that someday there will be a building put in between Kentucky Fried Chicken and Arby's, and then it will not be noticeable from Broadway at all. So
Yeah, I know.
that's what the
I
minutes.
know the chair, Mr. Chairman disagrees.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me at all.
And another thing for me is that this business has been active in North Salina and in a positive way. I mean, they attend the Spring Spruce Up and Fall Fix Up, and they've attended the Broadway meetings. And so, and then, yeah, when we were looking at that, the distance just sounded like, I don't remember now, the width of a football field or something, so it made me think it was far enough away. I will say I drove by, and it was bigger than I would
It is.
picture, but it doesn't bother me.
Well, it would bother me if Kmart was removed and I lived in a housing development there, which is, if you look at the Broadway revision plans, that's exactly what would be happening. I would not want a barbed wire fenced enclosure thing full of that stuff across from my house. But I said that when we approved it.
And maybe by then the junipers will be larger and we won't see it.
I hope so. This is Kansas, though. Grow junipers grow.
Seems like we had that concern.
We did have that
talked about
concern,
that,
and we talked about it
and that
extensively.
indicated that we really wouldn't see very much.
They did.
uh,
Shows up like ugly on it.
And we talked extensively
Saturday.
about at least going to the highest level possible to create some kind of landscaping plan there that would make it more palatable in the future. But I don't consider this to be that, so, but that's my opinion.
And how big are the juniper?
They're probably 7 feet.
So, a couple of years, 4 years, we probably won't see it.
You think?
A foot a year.
On the north
They're only
side.
this wide.
It is, and it is
Yeah.
only on the
So-
north side.
This is what we showed last time, and it's a more close-up.
Yeah, those
view of
junipers are
that.
going to take more than 4 years. I have some of those in my yard.
Not those juniper.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
So it remains to be seen. We don't have any inkling of what may or may not happen with Kmart. We reported at the time that not this property, but the property actually, there's a piece of property that is south of Kmart and west of this, and there was a proposal for a housing project there that went to the Kansas Housing Office, and they disapproved the application for tax credits because they didn't think it was a place where people would want to live. So,
And having been a developer, and that having been my career, if I was asked to consider this area for a housing development across the street, we'd look elsewhere. So, but I asked that evening that everyone consider the future, not the present in this situation. So, it doesn't, yeah. It's one of those times when I'll be much more careful about my vote the next time.
so what we were trying to convey is that, and we didn't bring the owners back here or anything to have them explain what we believe is that it has nothing to do with the owners. We think they were straightforward what they presented. We think they carried out what we understood. What it means is that on cases like this, that staff is going to, in the future, will have to be very more concerned about having a exact meeting of the minds between commissioners and staff so that we better give you the tools to carry out what your intent is. But as we went back and reviewed it, we think that what they put here is what they said they were going to put there, and that we made sure that they carried out what was allowed. So for clarification, the C3 district does not allow outdoor storage. This was done as a planned C3 district, and the exception granted was the exception to have outdoor storage in this area of that size and in this location. And this is what turned out, and I would agree with Ms. Good that at least from that perspective, we have found that border states have been very good corporate citizens. They've been actively engaged in the Broadway study. They've attended the meetings. They've provided feedback. They are themselves concerned about what happens long-term on the corridor, so I think they're vested and invested in that. And so we just wanted to bring this back so that we could try to do better next time.
Thank you. Anything else?
For upcoming items, I don't know what school district did to spring break, but they moved it. Traditionally, they've had their spring break when we've had our third Tuesday of the month planning commission, and that's not happening this year because spring break's next week. So we are going to have meetings on the 19th, which will be after spring break, and then again on April 2nd. And you can write down on your calendars that April 16th meeting will not be held.
Thank you.
So we will be doing our annual review of the comprehensive plan at our next meeting on the 19th. And so we'll primarily focus on that, and if we need to roll that discussion over or have homework items to roll over, it's an item that you can continue for further discussion if you wish.
Do we have any study sessions scheduled in the near future or
We
any
currently-
topics that we'll be
Currently
addressing?
do not, and we kind of discussed that, but the next week, we're going to be rolling out the start of our downtown entertainment ordinance work, and working with a steering committee and with the project plan that we have for that. We're going to be heavily committed to that, but we do have, we are working on the side on a number of housing-related initiatives, and of course, one of those that we need to continue to work on is accessory dwelling units, and also further discussion of short-term rentals, and then probably a brief thing where we can discuss the distinction between what we call cottages or small homes that meet all the building code requirements versus tiny homes which don't meet any building code requirements and are usually placed on trailers and hauled around. And so there is a group in Wichita that is has a development it's trying to do in Wichita, but they are not, they call it micro mansions, and what they are not is tiny homes. What they are is cottages. They're 400 to 600 square feet, but they don't have ladders, they have stairs, and they have windows that people can get in and out of, and floor plans and on permanent foundations. So we probably will sometime this spring, take time to discuss that. I know that the reason we're not going to meet on the 16th is that Laura and Dustin and I are going to attend the National Planning Conference, and there's a large number of sessions on cottages, affordable housing, micro mansions, and the questions of short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. And so they had a mobile workshop. It was a walking tour to look at different sorts of accessory dwelling units, and I tried to sign up for it and it was already full. So
Where is it?
It is being held in San Francisco this year.
Perfect place for it.
So,
Everybody has an ADU.
yeah.
Will the city take us?
Yeah, I'd like to go, please.
You can have a virtual
Yeah.
connection.
You can just Facebook Live from there. We'll be happy to watch.
When you say tiny homes, I think of a tiny home as on a slab, not on wheels.
And the true so what we're trying to say is that the tiny homes, the things that are in programs on TV and all those are designed and built in plants and they're designed to meet the same specifications that an RV or a camper meets. They're not built to be placed on a permanent foundation.
There are some, however, that really are built for a foundation. We have one, in fact, on our land. And
But it's not-
very tight and very well insulated, so
Right.
that's not maybe the entire description.
But by definition, what is referred to as a tiny home, the reason that, and people who have tiny homes can't find a community that they can put a tiny home on a permanent foundation on. So there's almost no city in the United States where you can take a tiny home and put it on a permanent foundation.
Yeah,
not because of zoning, but because they don't meet the local life safety codes. And so what people have done, like the Micro Mansions group in Wichita, is they have designed what they refer to as micro mansions, so that they're not called tiny homes, that do meet all the building code and life safety code requirements. And if they came to Salina and said, we want to buy this vacant lot and put up a micro mansion, they could get a permit across the table today. But what is you see on TV and what is commonly referred to as tiny homes are designed to be hauled around on a trailer and moved from place to place. And that is a different than a permanent foundation dwelling.
Just for the record, that's what I'm talking about. I want to see them on foundations. I don't want wheels in them, so.
Right, no
Me too.
caravan trailers. But we do, that is also back to the subject of accessory dwelling units, because granny pods and, I mean, that kind of concept could be implemented in people's yards, not on individual lots. But that requires looking closely at ADUs also, which we've been doing. So I hope you get lots of great information and come back
So we do hope
with
to
ideas.
bring those back and report back, because in those states where housing is much more expensive or much more short supply than it is in the Midwest, those people are ahead of the game in terms of coming up with creative ways to make that work.
I think communicating, though, the fact that it isn't necessarily less expensive is where our issue is. Affordable housing is not the same thing as small footprint housing. Small footprint housing in this area can cost just as much to build. What we really need to investigate, of course, is initiatives for actual affordable housing and moderate housing construction in Salina, which isn't necessarily tiny homes or small cottage homes. But that comes from a combination of financing and incentives, which is a different subject.
And as far as your next agenda and the discussion of the comprehensive plan annual review, that will be a perfect time to look at some of those things, because some of those things appear on your goals list, and we will be bringing that back so we can kind of help prioritize those as far as comp plan implementation.
Excellent. Yes, we're certainly moving in the right direction. All of you that have been participating and coming, I appreciate that.
So, again, we want to thank our youth members for attending.
Thank you, youth
and
members.
wanna
Welcome.
Be sure that you do have microphones in front of you. You've got little buttons there that the green light will come on and it's on, or you can push it where it's off. But you can buzz in at any time with questions or anything that we're going too fast or you don't understand. Feel free to ask any question that the people up here would ask if you need some clarification. So we want you to be participants and not just observers. So with that, we will hope everybody enjoys spring break, however they observe it, and we'll see you on the 19th.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Or I don't believe so. That happens to be one of my associates. Do you have anything to say? No? No. Perfect.
I move we adjourn.
Second? It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Everyone have a good evening.